Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Telling about growing up in a Russian house and revisiting his roots, please welcome Eli Itin. Eli Itin.
Good evening. So I grew up in a Russian house, a traditional Russian house, and that meant we had a number of traditions. I'm going to concentrate on two of those traditions. The first was borscht. For those of you who don't know, borscht, traditional Russian beetroot soup, which you have to eat very, very quickly, especially when your mother calls you to eat it and says, come eat the soup very, very quickly because it's going to get cold. The reason why it's going to get cold is because they put this really cold sour cream into it. You have about 3 seconds to eat it. The second tradition we had in our house was anti-Semitism. Now, don't get me wrong, we didn't exhibit anti-Semitism, but we grew up with a strong sense of Russian anti-Semitism through my parents' stories. And this one particular story always stayed in my mind. And my father told me the story, and he repeated the story when I told him as I was finishing school that I was going to go back and visit Russia, go back to the homeland, to which his response was, Ilyusha, please, don't do it. Please. And he told me why. And he told me that when he was a soldier in the Russian Air Force, he was in a group of soldiers back in 1968 who were picked up from their battalion to, of all things, go and occupy Czechoslovakia. And they gathered them up, brought them to the central train station in Moscow. And just as they were about to board the train, my father was, by the way, very excited. This was the first time he was going to leave the country, go overseas, meet new people, occupy them. As they lined up on the platform, before they're about to board the train, an officer from the political bureau, every military unit had to have their own political bureau to make sure they don't overthrow the regime, have a revolution, that kind of thing. And as they lined up, an officer arrived and said, not everyone can board the train. And there were 3 reasons for which you get disqualified and for which you would not be allowed to board the train, go overseas, occupy Czechoslovakia. And the reasons were as follows. Number 1, if you had higher education. My father was a university graduate, he had higher education. The second reason, if your physique, if your looks, if the way that you looked wasn't attractive enough, and I'm not making this up, if it wasn't attractive enough to represent the heroic Slavic people. The third reason, if you were Jewish. My father proudly says today that he failed on all 3 counts. So, of course, he was very upset. He never got to visit Czechoslovakia. He had a whole bunch of other anti-Semitic experiences, which ultimately led him to leave Russia in the early 70s and come to Israel. So when he found that I was going to visit Russia, as I said, he was very much against it. He said, I have a terrible, terrible foreboding feeling about this. I ask you, I beg you, please do not go. I said, Dad, it's okay. You know, time has moved on. Things are different now. I'm going to go. I'm going to enjoy it. And there I find myself in Moscow, and I'm a great theater lover. I always loved the theater. And I thought, here I am in Moscow, famous city, famous for its theater. I'm going to go and see a play. So I look around and I see there is a play by Mikhail Bulgakov. Those of you who read would have perhaps heard of The Master and Margarita or The Devil in Moscow, famous book. This was not the play. This play was called The White Guard, and it was a story about this epic war, the 1917 Civil War between the white Tsarist army on the one hand and the heroic Soviet communist Red Army on the other. And there I am sitting in this very respectable Russian theater with all this time, this thought going through my head. Don't go to Russia. Terrible. I see terrible things happening to you. And of course, nothing had really happened. So like I'm thinking, what does that know? And I'm sitting in the theater, and the theater progresses, and there's one scene where the White Army comes into the Ukraine, and they're coming in with their guns, and the soldiers are all there, and they see a Jew. They see a Jew walking through the street. This was in the Bulgakov original story. And they grab the Jew, and of course, being traditional, emphasis on tradition, Russians, they start beating him up. They start throwing him around. This poor Jew gets thrown around. All of this is happening. While this is happening, the Russian educated, cultured audience is practically cacking their pants from laughter. This is a very, very funny experience for them. This is exactly what it sounded like, only multiplied by about 400 people. How this Jew is being harassed by the Russians. At some point, they get sick and tired of throwing him around. One of them pulls out the gun, aims at him, and shoots him. Now, I'm sure Bulgakov was not writing a comedy when he wrote this, but this poor Russian kid fell to the ground to the hilarious laughter of my educated Russian theater-going audience. Of course, now I'm thinking, I wonder if this is what Dad meant when he said you're going to have a terrible experience. And you know, with very, very mixed feelings, I look around me still in awe about what is going on, and I left for the intermission. The lights go up. By the way, the Jewish guy is still lying on the stage. The lights have gone up. The play is now in intermission, but perhaps because he's Jewish, he's still lying on the stage, and no one has bothered to move him away. Exactly. You were there. So I leave the theater, go back to my hotel room, and the next morning I buy a one-way ticket to Czechoslovakia. Thank you.
Thank you so much.